It would start with one man's vision, the dream of a car that could win races, that would sell over 4.3 million cars over 20 years, that would change with fashions and become a thing of legend, that would help a rep make his sale by taking the company's latest teasmade from Slough to Swindon on a tricky Tuesday in the rain, that could take the kids and their luggage on a week's holiday to Clacton while using slightly less fuel and with slightly more luggage space. That car would be the Ford Cortina, and this is its story.
The Ford Cortina story starts with a compact saloon project in Detroit codenamed Cardinal. Ford North America decided it didn't want to produce it, so offered the project to Ford of Germany, who would transform it into the 1962 Taunus 12M. Sir Patrick Hennessy of Ford UK was in Detroit at the time and figured something like this would work well in the UK. It says a lot about how Ford UK and Ford of Germany worked at that time that he didn't consider developing the car with the Germans, but decided to make their own versions. In a game of one-upmanship, Ford UK would beat Project Cardinal with Project Archbishop. The new Taunus was slated for a September 1962 release, and ever competitive, Ford UK took it upon themselves to beat that release date with a car they hadn't even designed yet. Fred Hart would lead development after his successful 1959 Ford Anglia. The chief designer was Detroit cast-off Roy Brown Jr., sent to the UK in disgrace after he designed the colossal failure that was the Ford Edsel. The project went from idea to production in just 24 months, with only 3 months to create a clay mock-up. That's short today when we have computer-aided design speeding up development, and it was a crazy short time in the 1960s. The car world is littered with corpses of cars that were rushed to market, but Ford UK in the 1960s were laser focused. They knew exactly what car they wanted to build. It needed to be a light saloon with lots of luggage space for family holidays or for company reps to carry samples. The strange thing was Ford was about to release almost the same car. In 1961, Ford released the Ford Consul Classic, and as you can see, it was a very similar car. Wheelbase was essentially the same, and both were 2- and 4-door saloons. The Cortina was lighter, but both used similar capacity engines. As the Cortina was originally slated to be called the Consul 225 and would be released as the Ford Consul Cortina, it was clear that Ford wanted both cars to be seen as variants of the same car, even though beneath they were completely different. It seems crazy that Ford would build new chassis willy-nilly, where today one chassis is reused for multiple vehicles. The Cortina name was picked at the last minute, just before the new car's photo shoot. Cortina was used to evoke thoughts of exotic Mediterranean towns. It was a name on people's lips after the 1956 Winter Olympics had been held there, and Ford would go on to use Mediterranean town names on the Capri, Granada, Fiesta, Escort and Transit. Okay, maybe not the last three. Despite the short development period, the car went through extensive tests with over 20 prototypes. It was launched on September the 20th, 1962, the same month the German Project Cardinal was released as the Ford Taunus 12M. The car was shown off to the public at the October Earls Court Motor Show. Ford made sure there were a few in every British showroom, ready to sell. The small 1.2 litre Kent engine got the car to 60 in 22.5 seconds, with a top speed of 75 miles an hour. The Kent engine was first used in the 1959 Ford Anglia, and it was so long-lived it was still being used by the Ford Fiesta in 2002. There would be both manual and automatic gearboxes. The manual was a 4-speed all-synchromesh affair, and having synchromesh on all gears was still a bit of a novelty in the early 1960s. Ford was able to discount the Cortina as the lighter car used less metal. The contemporary styling caught on, and it was rapidly outselling its sister car, the Consul Classic. People loved the iconic round rear lights, which are still a design classic today. The 1963 Ford added an estate to the range and worked with Lotus to create a competition version of the Cortina. Lotus had already worked their magic on Ford's 1.5 litre engine for the Lotus Elan, and they produced the Cortina Lotus that would compete in motorsports in Europe, the USA, South Africa and New Zealand, with its front unloaded wheel becoming a common sight on fast corners. It won the 1966 RAC Rally, but was more at home on the racetrack, winning many titles with drivers such as Jim Clark, Jackie Ickx and Jackie Stewart behind the wheel. The white car with the green stripe was popular with enthusiast drivers, and its wins on the racetrack got the public flocking to Ford dealerships. Australia would produce and race its own version, the Cortina GT500. As a publicity stunt, Jim Clark drove a Cortina down the Cortina Winter Olympics bobsled run, taking the turns faster than any bobsled could. In 1964 there was a small refresh, including what Ford called the Aeroflow ventilation system. It had the ability to refresh the entire interior in less than a minute, useful for fatigued drivers. The car got uprated front disc brakes, and the biggest change was the name. The console name was now dropped. It was now just the Ford Cortina. And sales went from strength to strength. Soon it was second only to its main competitor, BMC's Austin 1100 and 1300. With this popularity, Ford moved to sell the car in other parts of the world, producing it in the Netherlands, Australia, Taiwan, Singapore and South Korea under license by Hyundai. With the Cortina selling like hotcakes, Ford concentrated on producing a solid and equally fashionable follow-up. This time Roy Haynes was responsible for the stylish design, with a whiff of the American Ford Falcon about it. Roy would then move to British Leyland, where his follow-up would be the decidedly unfashionable Morris Marina. The new car was shorter but wider, giving more interior space and more boot space, which Cortina customers were looking for. The car featured child locks and wraparound rear lights so that from the side the car could be seen at night. The car got a new 1.3 litre version of the Kent engine, but Ford used smaller engines in some markets to get around tax restrictions, such as the 1.1 litre in Greece. The update in styling, size, engine and interior features meant Ford could keep ahead of the competition. The public loved it. Ford were on a roll, not just with the Cortina, but with their other cars, rapidly gaining market share. By 1967, when Ford rolled out the Estate variant, the Cortina was the #1 selling car in the UK. For the Cortina, the future was so bright it had to wear shades. 1967 was also when Ford debuted the high-spec sporty 1600E Executive at the Paris Motor Show. It got uprated suspension and a powerful 1.6 litre engine, but also included high luxury items like a walnut dashboard, bucket seats, leather-wrapped steering wheel and front fog lights. Where the Cortina Lotus was stripped down performance, this was luxurious performance, and again Ford perfectly judged the public's taste. But for those who wanted stripped down performance, the Cortina Lotus was back. But with Lotus moving factories at that time, instead of Lotus modifying each car, it was decided Ford would build them on their production line at Dagenham. As well as reducing costs, this also increased reliability, as the hand-built nature of the car was removed. Ford was a little perturbed that the Mark I Cortina Lotus's reliability problems had been attributed to Ford, whereas the performance and cool factor were notched up to Lotus's sporting roots. The Cortina Lotus was essentially a 1600 GT with a more powerful 109 brake horsepower engine and different suspension. Although it lost its iconic green stripe, dealers were happy to add it on for a small price. The car was now offered with left-hand drive and was known as the Cortina Twin Cam, likely to minimise the free publicity Ford was giving to Lotus. This would be the last Cortina Lotus, as the next Group 2 competition car would be the Ford Escort Twin Cam, also with Lotus's help. With the Cortina competing in USA motorsports, enterprising American dealers imported 1.5 litre Cortinas, with modest sales peaking at almost 23,000 in 1969. But 1970 would be the last year for the Cortina in the USA, with Ford introducing its own small car, the Ford Pinto. But in Canada, the Cortina soldiered on until 1973. Basil Green Motors of South Africa were founded in 1967, and they soon became specialists at modifying Fords into wild animals. They began with the Ford Cortina, lowering the suspension and installing a Ford Essex 3-litre V6, calling it the Piranha. They would go on to convert the Escort, Capri and Granada. They're still around, converting cars like the Ford Mustang, but tuned Cortinas appeared in the UK as well, such as the 3-litre V6 Cortina Savage. The German Taunus and British Cortina showed just how much Ford was duplicating effort in Europe, and Detroit wanted this to end. Ford conceived the Mark III Cortina as a world car, not the last time they would try and do it. Although thoughts of using the new Cortina stateside were dropped, it would mean that Ford in Europe would align the Cortina and Taunus cars under one common design, codenamed TC for Taunus Cortina. But in truth this was just one step in the unification that had begun with the Ford Escort and would continue with the Granada. Although the Taunus and Cortina would be based on the same body, there would be differences between the two, and the Taunus would have a coupe variant, something that was covered by the Capri in the UK. If you thought the Mark II Cortina was America on wheels, the Mark III was so American you'd think its horn played Yankee Doodle Dandy and it ran on 4-star Budweiser. Ford's styling was more and more reflecting US models such as the Ford Falcon, and its Capri and Granada models would follow suit. Ford also killed off the slow-selling Corsair by making the Cortina a little larger and adding a 2-litre engine. The Mark III Cortina was 2 inches wider and the wheelbase was extended 3.5 inches, giving more rear legroom. But despite being much larger inside, it was the same length as the old car. This would wrong-foot competitors British Leyland, who were designing their Morris Marina to compete with the old Cortina and now found its car was too small. With a change in size, Ford thought about renaming the car, but with such a radical styling change, they figured that keeping the same popular name would help transition customers to the new model, something that was obviously forgotten when the Sierra was launched. Suspension was all new, with coils at the back and double wishbones up front, giving a much softer ride. It was heavier due to more metal to make the car more rigid for safety and included more sound deadening to reduce engine and road noise. But badly fitting doors actually increased the wind noise. Ford quickly solved this issue as well as vibration problems to make the car a good solid choice. The Cortina GXL would be the top of the line model, replacing the 1600E. With a new 2-litre Pinto engine and a 3-inch lower meaner stance, it could get to 60 in 10.6 seconds. But reviewers found the interior trim used cheap faux wood and plastic, and customers were turned off. I find it a little surprising when faux wood and plastic were all the rage in the 1970s. On October the 23rd, 1970, the Mark III Cortina was launched, but production was immediately hit with strike troubles that delayed getting this popular car into customers' hands. It may have been a blessing in disguise, as the new car's teething problems would be resolved while workers were striking. Ford were expecting even bigger sales from their new car and invested heavily in extra capacity. And they were right to do so, as once the strikes abated, sales took off, with the Ford Cortina and Escort trading the UK number 1 and number 2 sales spots until 1982. Abbott's in the UK made a convertible variant, and in South Africa a pickup or bakkie was produced. It proved to be so popular it was made into the Ford P100 that would live on in various forms until 1993. Ford of Australia used the 3.3 litre and 4.1 litre Ford Falcon engines to give the Cortina a little more power. Taiwan would continue production and would make a special version of the Cortina that was 7mm narrower to comply with Japanese tax rules. 1973 brought a facelift to the car and the slightly bouncy suspension was tamed. Realising the GXL felt cheap, the top model became the 2000E, using higher quality materials. The Ford sales juggernaut continued on, producing affordable cars that judged the public's mood perfectly. The car had its defects, but in the 1970s all cars had defects, and Ford was the cream of the crop. The Mark III Taunus and Cortina were based on the same platform but had distinct differences. With the Mark IV in 1976, the cars would be identical except for the badge. The design would be done by Uwe Barnson, who handled Ford's European styling until the mid-80s. The car shed its wild American looks for a more conservative angular approach, again following the fashion of the time. The new design would have more window area, giving a brighter cabin and better visibility. The dashboard remained the same, as it had been updated just 3 years previously. With the Mark IV not being much more than a restyle of the previous car, Mark III drivers felt right at home behind the wheel. The car would be available as a 2- or 4-door saloon, or a 5-door estate that used the rear from the 1974 Taunus, making it a rather odd-looking car. The top of the range would be the Ghia, styled by the Ghia design house Ford had purchased a few years earlier. There was a hope that the name would exude luxury and an aspirational desire to trade up. And Ford needed to keep updating the Cortina with other manufacturers offering strong competition. Volkswagen launched their Passat in 1972 that would compete with the Taunus on the continent. The Opel Ascona appeared in 1970, and the second version came to British shores in 1975 as the Vauxhall Cavalier. Mid-size Opels and Vauxhalls would continue to be a thorn in Ford's side. Ford were ever keen to use product placement to sell their cars, and the Mark I Cortina had seen action as glam cabs in Carry On Cabby. And cinema goers would see the Mark IV Cortina Retmobile chasing James Bond in his Lotus Esprit in the 1977 film The Spy Who Loved Me. The Cortina gained the V6 2.3 litre Cologne engine in 1977, but it didn't sell well as it used more fuel than the similar 4-cylinder engine while only being slightly faster. Ford of Australia continued to sell the Cortina, with the estate version surprisingly being produced by Renault in Australia. Ford launched a refresh of the Cortina in August 1979 as Cortina 80. It had a new roof and larger windows. Interior trim was improved along with slightly larger headlights, and rust proofing was a lot better. There's a good reason you don't see many Mark IVs on the road today, and rust is the main culprit, although their propensity to be used in banger racing probably didn't help. The engines had better performance and fuel economy. The estate kept the 1970 Taunus rear end, now looking hopelessly out of date. But the Cortina was still a top seller until production ended, and the special Crusader edition was especially popular, selling over 30,000 cars. Behind the scenes, Ford was working on an aerodynamic Cortina replacement that would be called the Sierra. But with the last Cortina rolling off the production line in 1982, Ford could be proud of their little car that sold nearly 4.3 million cars over 20 years, 2.6 million alone in the UK.
A little dicky bird told me you haven't subscribed to Big Car yet. It's easy and you'll know when new videos come out. Just hit the subscribe button below, and if you want you can become a patron for just 80p a month. It's easy, you know it makes sense.